You received a call from an inmate at the Department of Corrections. This call will be recorded and monitored. If you wish to block any future calls of this nature, dial 7 now. To accept this call, press 5 now. To decline this call, hang up.
Well, hello there, Michael. How goes the battle? Oh, yeah. She called me, and she said she received this letter, and it was just a flat-out lie. So I advised her that she needed to talk to local law enforcement and see if we can get this thing resolved, because there's no reason for the Department of Corrections or any government official to send out letters that are not true. Yeah, I know. When things like that get around, it could do some harm. And that's one of the reasons that the state of Washington put that law in the books. They don't want government officials telling people things that aren't true and leading to some kind of heartache or retribution or maybe loss of funds or something like that, or even lawsuits. And it's a good law. I like it, and I use it when I need to. It just reminds people that government officials are not above the law, and we need to hold our elected officials and officials that are appointed accountable for their actions. And it would be good if we use something like that for everybody, but at least with the government, people who work for us, they shouldn't be lying to us. And I don't think this was a good idea, what happened to you. And I think good things are going to come out of it. She's definitely going to pursue it, and she's not going to do this alone. She definitely has your support. And then there's some other organizations and community leaders that are working with her too. So as of today, you're in a good spot. Oh, yeah, I know. It does extend, because not only does it affect you, it affects the people that you are incarcerated with, family members, the other people in the neighborhood. It's a lie like that is it just grows, and there's only one way to stop it, and that's to cut it off at the source, and then to broadcast it to make sure everybody knows that this is definitely wrong. And that's a good thing to do. Let the folks in that prison know that you don't appreciate this type of activity and you were willing to fight it. And that's true. It doesn't always work, but it's a 100% guaranteed fail if you don't try. And that's what we're talking about. She's actually trying. She's putting forth the extra effort. And working with that group of people, if one method doesn't work, there's all kinds of backup methods. And what's nice about what she's doing here is that there are people out there who have some input that could help her that she didn't even consider. Yeah, because there's people who've been through this before, and they've run into walls, or they've had some successes, and they're happy to share it. Because our ultimate goal is just to end this kind of activity. And that's good, yeah. There's, even in the private sector,
You have 60 seconds
there's
remaining.
information that gets out on the internet, and there's companies that will go in and make efforts to erase that information, so that when people apply for jobs, or they're looking for a recommendation for a position, or maybe a spot in a church, then we don't want false information popping around out there on the internet. And then some bad
You have 30 seconds remaining.
is covered as well. And so it's good that we have organizations that do that. And we are the ones that do that for the government. We are the ones that know when they're lying, when they're telling the truth, when they're doing their job, when they're just sitting around. And it's our money that's paying for it, so we don't need to be wasting it. Well, okay, well, thanks for the call, and good luck on this venture, and don't give up. And definitely show her some support.
Thank you for using inmate call. Goodbye.
Welcome to AQS Inmate Call. I am your host, Joel Wilborn. And in this episode, I want to tackle a big issue that a lot of people run into when they're dealing with the Department of Corrections, and that's when you get ignored. You've got an issue that you've heard about from your loved one or a friend of a loved one, but somehow you get this information and you want it resolved, especially when it deals with human rights. And we'll use an example. Let's say you have a loved one who's incarcerated, and his name is Bob. And Bob has a chronic illness, maybe lower back pain. And Bob gets into a little scuffle. There's shots fired. Bob is sentenced to prison. Bob lets everybody know, I've got this chronic illness. I need medication or I'm going to be suffering with all this pain. Now, my philosophy and my mantra here is if the system can't handle people of all backgrounds and all disabilities and all nationalities and religions, if they can't handle them, they shouldn't be sending them to prison. They should be finding an alternative. So if a person is sentenced, the gavel comes down and this person is sentenced to prison, that means the prison can handle it. And so one thing you don't want to hear from prison officials is we don't have the manpower, we don't have the staff. That's not a very good excuse. As a matter of fact, it's not an excuse at all. Because why would the justice system send people there if they couldn't handle it? So we don't want that answer whenever we have an issue like this. So Bob goes to prison. Bob is complaining that he's got these disabilities. And he contacts you and says, I'm not getting the medication that I need, and my back is killing me. I can't do any work. And you know this to be true. And so what I do is when people ask me, what do I expect before I go to prison or one of the family members, is the first thing I say, just document all illnesses, all disabilities, any problems that you have that you're under a doctor's care for. And you discuss it with the doctor. So most likely a loved one can go and say, Bob's going into prison and he has this disability and he's taking this medication. What can we do to help him? And if the doctor says he's got to take this medication, there's generic forms, but he's got to take this in order to live a productive life. And you can get documentation of that. You can maybe ask if he'd be a witness in a court case or something. But definitely get with the medical team and get this documented. And if the person's incarcerated, then the loved one can get this information from the family doctor, and the incarcerated person can still give permission if the doctor talks about it. Or you can just ask in general. If it's some type of asthma, you can just ask in general to your doctor, if a person has this type of asthma, what do we do? That's the first thing you do. And that way, when it comes up we can't do it, or we don't have the resources, it's more like he was sent to prison. And before he was sentenced, everybody was told that he has this condition and that he needs this type of treatment or medication for it. So we know we've eliminated that. So Bob is complaining that he's not getting the medication. and you know what not to expect, because that's one of the things you do in your research. What kind of answers could they give? What kind of rebuttals could you give? Understaffed, not enough money, all that silly stuff. No, doesn't work. So Bob has this legitimate complaint. His human rights are being violated. That's a federal law. It's a state law. It's a law. And you write a letter to, let's say, the superintendent of the prison. And after a week, you don't get a response. Now, this is a serious issue. It's a violation of the law. So you contact your doctor, see if you can get some support, or your loved one's doctor, Bob. And you can talk to an advocate. You can talk to some nonprofits. You can go on Facebook to some of these groups that have, kind of like if you do a search for prison, you might see prison reform, or maybe a certain prison, like this one might be the Washington State Penitentiary, and there might be a Washington State Penitentiary group. And you can just kind of put on there, it's like, I have a loved one who's trying to get some medication. Anybody have any advice? And a lot of folks will give you some really good advice on that. Now, if they're ignoring you, that's their way of telling you, we don't want to handle this, find somebody else. Okay, that's what you do. You can file a complaint with the governor's office. You can contact your local senator, and now if this is a state prison, you go to the state senators and representatives. You can talk to the police department and just ask for advice. This is going on. What can we do? The inspector general for the state defends any state official. So if these officials are ignoring you and your loved one, Bob, is getting really bad treatment in there and not able to perform any duties and make any money, then we've got a big issue. And so talking to the local police department or the state police department, you tell them his civil rights are being violated. You can contact the Human Rights Commission in your state. Some of them have an ethics board, but you don't give up. You just keep fighting, and you grow your support group. Supportive relationships are key in situations like this. And you have to think, the entire time you're working on this, your loved one is suffering. And there's no excuse for that suffering. We've already eliminated we don't have the manpower, we don't have the money, because if you didn't, they wouldn't have sent Bob to prison. It's just as simple as that. And that could be something you could say to people. Maybe if the warden does contact you, or the superintendent, and gives that ridiculous excuse, you can simply say, well, then why didn't you say that to the court? Why didn't you say that? There could be a statement out. We don't have the manpower to handle anybody with the following disabilities, or with that needs the following medication. Because if they don't do that, the court, the jurors, they don't know that by sending this person to prison could wind up in suicide, death, more of a disability. Maybe this person could wind up getting hurt, even worse. Or there could just be some kind of conflict that goes on. Maybe Bob just can't stand it anymore and just throws a fit. And it could be like a mental condition. This person just snaps. And that might be one of the reasons the person was getting prescribed a certain medication. A big case that I had on a Zoom call one time was a woman said her husband had diabetes, and he was on the insulin pump. But when they put him in there, they weren't giving him proper medication. And being on an insulin pump means your diabetes is really, really bad and hard to control. And so she even offered to buy the insulin pump and put it in there. I mean, it's not like you can take it and manufacture illegal drugs, or if you can manipulate it to the point where you could kill a person. Of course, overdose of insulin could do something like that. But these people, they need every piece of that pump, and they could be watched and monitored, and just maybe a person check the pump once in a while, make sure that it hasn't been manipulated or something. And I can understand their caution in that, but if you can't handle a person who's needs a certain medication or certain medical devices, don't lock them up. The judge can look at it and say, oh, this person's on an insulin pump, and we know this prison can't handle an insulin pump, so let's do something else. And yeah, there's going to be people out there that take advantage of it, just like with the transgender people. I'm a male, I love women, I'm going to say I'm a female, go to the female prison. They can manipulate that. Guards and prison officials should be trained in looking out for that kind of stuff. And maybe in a response is more like, Bob has had a history of using a disability to get an advantage. And that's really tough to beat. But if they're not saying anything, if you just got silence, then it means that they're hiding something. And most likely, they're saying we can't handle it. And so, like I said, silence means find somebody who can help. Go to a higher authority. You could be looking at clemency. And then you can talk to an attorney and say they can't take care of them in there. They didn't tell anybody about this. We need to get this issue dealt with. In the meantime, Bob needs to be sent home, maybe on a home monitoring, maybe on probation or parole. Bob does not need to be in there because Bob is going to be seriously harmed if we don't get this under control. I don't like the idea of funding prisons or building prisons or loading prisons down with staff. We can prevent crimes by throwing money into preventive measures and mental well-being. We don't need to be building 600 more prisons to hold people that we can't care for when they're locked up. People should not be dying in prison. They should not be suffering in prison. Because when you look at guidelines for prisons, none of them say you will not be giving your required medication. You will not be placed in a facility that can care for you. You will not be given your proper diet. You will not receive medical care. You will not receive food or place to live. That's not in the guidelines. And so in your research, you can look at what the prison's expected to do. A lot of it's a lot of common sense. When we're growing up, things that we have a right to do, prisoners have a right. And I've received complaints from prisoners about TV cable being out, or the internet being down, or maybe the room is too cold. And yeah, that's a legitimate complaint, but I have to remind them, you committed this crime and you're sitting in prison. Deal with it. And every time they agree. Yes, you're right. They were just kind of throwing it out there to see if there was anything I can do. There's certain grievances and complaint systems they can do inside the prison. And that's good for them to do. Yet, they're in prison. And that's the first thing they have to understand. They're in prison. Now, I'm not going to say that everybody in prison deserves to be there, because there are a lot of innocent people in there. They're just going about their business, but they're in the wrong place at the right time and got locked up. There's ways to handle that too. There's certain groups that will work with them, and you can talk to and just bang on the door and stuff to help these folks get out. Especially if you find some evidence that exonerates them. But the people who are guilty, they have to deal with this. They did the crime, they're doing the time. That's life. But when they're in there, They shouldn't be eating dog food. Now, I'm not saying this ever happened, but they shouldn't be eating dog food in there because they have a right to human food. They have a right to a good nutrition. They have a right to clothing. And if it's raining and they have to work outside, they need rain gear. And they need shoes, comfortable shoes. And if something is harming them while they're in there, if they're in there and they get bit by a spider, the prison should be equipped to handle something that wasn't caused by any negligence of the incarcerated person. So the underlining topic here, that the Department of Corrections ignores you. Immediately look at that as, we can't handle this. Your stuff is beyond our scope, your issue. Find somebody who can. It's their silent way of reaching out to you. And do it. Get as many people on your team as possible looking into this. It affects everybody, because if Bob gets out and he is in worse condition than when he went in there, maybe this pain just mentally affected him, just drove him over the edge, and he gets out and he's just angry and he doesn't care anymore, and he starts harming people or breaking some other laws, we didn't accomplish anything. And it could be that they all your complaints, they're saying, okay, we need to do something about Bob, and they go in and they find something else. Maybe, well, this medication was leading to these conditions. We didn't notice that before. So there's things that can happen when you draw attention to something. But ignoring you means find somebody else. You need the doctors on your side. If you can get attorneys, legislators, community leaders, advocates, all these folks can help you. And the more pressure we put on the prison, the more likely you're going to get something done. But if you do nothing, they're not going to stop. They'll keep right on ignoring people. And in the state of Washington, if you send a communique out and they say, well, we examined him, everything's okay, he doesn't need this, he's lying to you, and you know that's a false statement, that's a criminal offense. And just to reiterate that, in the state of Washington, there's a law called the RCW 42.20.040. It's called false report. Every public officer who shall knowingly make any false or misleading statement in any official report or statement under circumstances not otherwise prohibited by law shall be guilty of a gross misdemeanor. That's the state of Washington. Any government official who lies to you is guilty of breaking this law. Remember that in Washington. Check your state. If you're not in the state of Washington, check and see if you have a law like that. Most likely you do. Use that to your advantage, especially when it's a matter like this. And understand there are some things, if you want to know if Bob is in a relationship with somebody, that they don't necessarily have to tell you. But if you're calling over there or writing letters or sending emails and you're getting false reports and you know it, you can prove it, then file a complaint. Get it out there. One thing the DOC does not like is negative reports. They need funding, they need people. It's hard to get that when there's hundreds of complaints against them. I don't know why they just can't follow their policy and give these people these medical procedures or medical assistance that they need, not are asking for, that they actually need. I don't see why they're not doing that. But if we keep on them, they're going to have to. Just follow the policy. If it's not working for them, change the policy. If there's not enough people or staff, then don't send anybody over there. It's pure and simple. But nothing's going to come out into the open if you just give up. And hopefully one of the people in your support group will be a motivator. Will tell you, stick with it. Don't give up. Find another way. It's like the old saying, if you fall off your horse, get back on. There's no reason to give up on this, especially when it involves life or death. So if you're going through this, I wish you all the luck. And ignoring you doesn't necessarily mean you have to give up. It means somebody else is available to help you. That's a guarantee, because they obviously can't do it. And there's usually 3 different responses they give. They'll ignore you, or they'll give you a false report, or misleading, or just kind of trying to avoid it, or they'll actually give you what you need. Every government official should say, if they can't help you, this is what you do, the next step. Don't stand in your way. Make it easy for you. And there's always social media and the news press. But don't give up. Never give up. Well, thanks for tuning in. And hopefully you'll be successful, make some changes, and maybe we'll reduce the prison population by not sending as many people over there. Who knows? Won't know till we try. Well, go out and have yourself a fantastic day and make wonderful memories for tomorrow.